having like a bunch of these like big time stars get hit. So I'm very curious how some of these teams are going to handle it, because you can't just go in and just fill it in, like fill in the blank type stuff. Like it's
for sure.
It's the finals, it's the playoffs. I'm very curious how it's going to handle. But let's go ahead and kick this episode off. Here we go.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
Oh man, guess what, guys? We have another injury report coming at you. We do. But instead of having, Steph's beautiful face over here sitting right next to me, making me look like shit pretty much, because, yeah, it is what it is. I've got Adam over here joining me for the Rehab Report tonight. Oh, yes. What's going on, Adam? How you doing, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. I don't know if that was a compliment to Steph or a slight to me. I mean, I like to think I bring some beauty to the show as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of fellows, so it is what it is. We'll take it and run with it. But
couple dudes on the show.
Dudes talking football, like what else could it be? No, but obviously Steph, this is her show that she normally, takes off with on Tuesdays, but she wasn't feeling, too hot today. Regardless of her cries for ice cream and saying how bad she wanted ice cream, and then telling everybody that I was going to buy everybody ice cream, she actually isn't feeling too hot. So we decided to bring on Adam, who actually does our Sunday starter sit show, and actually gives the injury advice right before the week takes off. We do it at 11:30 every single Sunday morning. So, Adam, real quick, tell everybody where they can find you.
Appreciate you having me on. You guys can find me on Twitter at @therealadam_H. You can also find my work as long as the injury tracker. We're going to be talking about some injuries today. I write the injury tracker for the Undroppables, or any other of my other injury content can be found at theundroppables.com.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you guys can go check out all of our content over there at youtube.com/fantasy intervention. Once again, that's youtube.com/fantasy intervention. You guys can find all of our stuff. Make sure you go like and subscribe for us. It goes a long way. And then, of course, we have fantasy football discussion over there on Facebook, right? We got join our circle _ afterwards over there on Twitter. And you guys can find my account personally over there at FF_intervention on Twitter. If you're watching live, you can see the name right below. So let's go ahead and kick this show off. We have a ton. Oh my God. She is sitting there going wild. So we have a ton of stuff that's going on over here with these injuries. We're going into our final weeks, into our championship weeks. And for some of us who did not make it, we're going into an off season where, hey, we got moves to make. Hopefully COVID's not going to affect it as much, but yet we saw such a distracted off season when it came to some of these players kind of healing up and getting right. So with that being said, this is something as to where we're actually going to take a look at this, see if anybody's really affected long-term, but more importantly for the fantasy playoffs, we're going to dive right into it. So I wanted to start out with the quarterbacks, and I'm sitting over here, I'm looking at your show sheet, and you didn't have too many quarterbacks listed, but we're sitting there and we're looking at, Nick Mullins being out, right? That should be a huge effect to CJ Beathard. Is there anybody else? We have Alex Smith who could be back. Like, what's going on with the quarterback situation over there?
Yeah, so let's kick it off with Nick Mullins. He's got the elbow injury. 49ers are shutting him down. Jimmy Garoppolo was dealing with that high ankle sprain, had surgery on the high ankle sprain. I thought he could possibly make a late season return here. But since the 49ers have been effectively eliminated from the playoff contention, it sounds like they're not going to bring him back. He's going to sit. They made an interesting move and signed Josh Rosen today, but I think it's probably going to be CJ Beathard. So Josh Rosen potentially could be the backup there in San Francisco. I think Beathard's look good in spots. And somebody else that could be potentially returning for them. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but because we're talking about quarterbacks here, but George Kittle, him and CJ Beathard seem to have a nice connection there. So that's something to at least be optimistic about. I don't think it's going to be any worse than what Nick Mullins was giving you fantasy production wise at the quarterback position. But some of these other quarterbacks that I was talking about, we got Alex Smith dealing with the calf injury. I was skeptical about him playing last week. He's going to need to get some practices in this week. So this is going to be one that Thursday and Friday are going to be key. What's today? Tuesday. So yeah, Wednesday, hopefully we see a limited practice from him, but ideally Thursday or Friday, we're trying to get at least a full practice in there to feel good about Alex Smith playing.
Freaking Dwayne Haskins, man. Did you see that?
I did see a little bit of that. I don't know I had trouble deciphering what was true and what was fake on the internet. I know there was some fake stuff out there, but yeah, that didn't look good.
Yeah, he was at a strip club. For those of you guys don't know, he was at a strip club without a mask on. And he came out, he apologized. He's like, I was not wearing a mask at the strip club. I take responsibility. Well, yeah, you take responsibility. You're caught on camera. I don't care what was doctored or not. You were there, man. Like, you can't do that as the leader of a football team. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I would argue if you're at a strip club, you should be wearing 2 masks. You need to double up on that.
Hey, go easy on my girls, okay?
You can never be too safe out there.
Go easy on my girls, man. No, but we do have a listener question here. You guys can line up some questions about injuries, of course, mainly about NFL players. But Bo has one that's not about an NFL player. Sorry to take away from the NFL talk, but what's the recovery time for a stubbed pinky toe on the corner of his bed?
I know Bo. I think he's got to cut it off. I think we just got to eliminate that pinky toe, man. We got to amputate it. It's done. He needs to just remove that boy.
Yeah, and we will actually answer some of these questions in depth as we get to them. So, for example, we have Abigovich. I hope I said that right. He's asking how much more viable do the San Francisco injuries make Arizona? So before we actually answer this one, what other injuries are we talking about with San Francisco? You want to go ahead and dive into the running backs, or do we have any other quarterbacks left?
So the only other quarterback that I had on the show sheet, real quick, I know it's your show, but I got to talk about him, Daniel Jones, with this hamstring injury. I think he came back a little bit too soon. It sounds like he re-aggravated it. I think the Giants play Baltimore. I'm really not loving that matchup. Yeah, they're at Baltimore. I'm really not loving that matchup. The game he came back from his hamstring injury, Daniel Jones had 0 rushing attempts, which is something I was really worried about, that right hamstring being able to push off during his throwing motion. So even if he plays, I'm not feeling great about Daniel Jones at all.
Okay. So, yeah,
let's get into some of these San Francisco guys. So I'll start with the running back position. Raheem Mostert was placed on IR. Mechanism of injury looked like a high ankle sprain. That doesn't really matter for those people out there. That's just something I like to make a note about. But same ankle that he injured. So Raheem Mostert for fantasy football is not going to be relevant anymore. You can cut him. He's effectively done for the season. I really think there's a decent possibility that we could see some George Kittle. This was the timeline based on his injury that I kind of mapped. I thought week 16 was the most realistic. It's really going to come down to San Francisco. I talked about how they're eliminated from playoff contention. So do they even want to put George Kittle out there? But I think from the stuff that I'm reading, it sounds like this is the most realistic week that he could potentially come back. And then it's kind of old news, but they're not going to have Deebo Samuel. So it's possibly Ayuk. I mean, it's definitely Ayuk, and then possibly Kittle, and then not much after that.
And then speaking of the running backs, Jeff Wilson Jr. also re-aggravated his ankle as well. So he's questionable. Like, we're talking about potentially Tevin Coleman being rolled out there. Maybe, McKinnon. We have to really see what happens up against Arizona. So, with the question earlier, as to how, confident do I feel playing Arizona's defense. Oh, I love it. Absolutely love Arizona's defense this week. But, this is something as to where they're still probably not going to finish up, as a top 5 defense. But I could see top 10 pretty easily up against San Francisco, who just cannot catch a break this year with their injuries. They just can't.
Absolutely.
So let's go ahead. And I do want to answer this question. I know we're going back to quarterbacks kind of all over the place, but Derek Carr, right?
Yes.
Derek Carr, he's done, right, for the season, at least until the playoffs?
Yeah, that groin strain looked like a pretty significant groin strain. So different muscle group and different mechanism of injury, but what Daniel Jones was dealing with, but similar timeline in terms of their recovery. I think that's one we probably skipped over, but I think it's wheels up on Marcus Mariota this week. I don't expect Derek Carr to play against Miami.
Oh man, I don't know if I could play Marcus Mariota. So it's kind of funny. I actually brought up, some stats. Miami actually struggles up against quarterbacks who are mobile, right? Quarterbacks who can run.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the list in front of me because I already exited out of the show sheet, but we had Josh Allen who put up like 41 points on him. We had Russell Wilson put up like 24 points on him. I mean, it was just every single rushing quarterback. There's like 5 or 6 outside of Cam Newton one time. He did it once, but the other time he only put up 11. I think that was last week. They all have actually gotten above 24 fantasy points against this Miami defense. So if there ever was a week to play, Marcus Mariota, and up against the Miami Dolphins, who have been really good up against the quarterback, this would be the one because Marcus Mariota is able to scramble and get points on the ground, which, like we said, Miami struggles with. So
I like that. I like it.
Yeah, trying to get back to the running backs because, like I said, we are kind of a little bit all over the place. Let's go ahead and talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire since that was some of the big news, right?
Yep, that's a big one. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a couple of injuries, one to his ankle, one to his hip. I think the ankle is going to be the most limiting. It looked like a high ankle sprain. So I don't think you're going to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire for your fantasy football championships in week 16. Actually, I feel fairly confident saying that. Kansas City poised to make a deep playoff run. So I think they're going to keep him out the rest of the regular season, maybe even one. They'll potentially have a bye in the AFC. So we're definitely not going to see him in the regular season. Most likely in the playoffs, he would have come back.
Oh, man. Yeah. The high ankle sprains kill me, man.
There's a lot of them. There's a lot. I got a lot of them on the show sheet, and I feel like I'm being redundant with some of them. But yeah, there was for whatever reason, high ankle sprains, man, they spiked.
Well, give me another one. Give me another one.
So we talk about Mostert. We got Clyde. This is going to the wide receiver position here. I need a little bit more information. Some people I kind of trust on Twitter were whispering about this, and I went back and looked, and I think there's some truth to it. I think potentially Jalen Reagor for the Philadelphia Eagles might have a high ankle sprain. He exited with an ankle injury. It's really hard to see exactly what happened to his foot or ankle, but the mechanism of injury is very consistent with a high ankle sprain. So I think he's potentially another one. Practice reports are going to be very telling. I wouldn't be surprised tomorrow to see a did not practice for Jalen Reagor, and maybe even a couple of those leading up to Friday.
I mean, let's talk about it. Another rookie for the high ankle sprains, Cam Akers.
Yeah. Yep. He's another one running back. Don't expect to have him. I've been tracking because these high ankle sprains have been killers for running backs. And I know I talked about it on your show before, but I've been tracking these, plotting the data. For the stuff that I found for running backs, these take about 4 weeks. I mean, Christian McCaffrey was the exception because I think he had a more severe high ankle sprain injury. He was 6 weeks. So yeah, Cam Akers is another one that he's going to be not playing.
Yeah, I mean, from tracking it last year with me, and obviously I'm not anything close to what you are when it comes to medical knowledge, but, going back and looking at it, Alvin Kamara last year, high ankle sprain, struggled. He came back early. I think he came back after 2 weeks. I think Saquon Barkley was another one last year that did it too. But they weren't right. It took him about 6 weeks to get back to, kind of like okay relevance for fantasy and production. But it really took them 8 weeks to get up to the point where they were at prior to the high ankle sprain. So, some of these guys like CEH, like he might come back, in a couple weeks. He might come back in the playoffs, but is he really going to be effective? I don't know if that's the case. So somebody actually brought up, Le'Veon Bell and Le'Veon Bell's relevance. And it's like, Le'Veon Bell's going to be one of the only guys in that backfield. So I like Le'Veon Bell moving forward. He's going to be a top end waiver wire ad if he's out there, which he's not. I think he's rostered in 67% of leagues, but still.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, yeah, these it doesn't matter at this point in the season because essentially I would say most fantasy leagues are playing their fantasy championship in week 16. But we see time and time again when these running backs come back from that high ankle sprain, on average, they're averaging about 3 fewer points per game. Standard deviation of that is around 7. So you could see somebody averaging at around 10 fewer fantasy points per game coming back from those high ankle sprains.
And what about Joe Mixon and his foot? Does he have one? That's the first question. Does he have 2 feet or just one?
I think we can. I mean, I know it's a big thing on this show because I follow regularly, but I know it's a thing that say that Joe Mixon doesn't have a foot. I think he does have a foot.
Oh,
that's
gonna fight you. She's gonna pop on here and fight you.
She's gonna hit me up in my DMs. I'm just waiting right now, looking at him. No, I think it was a fracture that was missed. The Bengals, they paid him a lot of money. I know they won last night, but their season's been a disappointment for the most part. They just saw their franchise quarterback, suffer a pretty significant ACL tear. So at this point, I don't.
What's the point to bring him back?
Yeah, exactly.
Why would they bring Joe Mixon back?
I don't see them bringing him back at this point.
Yeah, I don't think that they are necessarily. I just don't see reason as to why. They're not that. I guess stubborn is the best way to put it, when trying to get the best production or whatever the case is. It's very interesting to see what's going to happen with Zach Taylor, following this year, and if he's going to get another chance to coach. I think he will, but he's going to be on a hot seat next year.
That game last night was big for him, man. I mean,
it was very big, massive.
They not only beat the Steelers, that score didn't indicate how dominant the Bengals were for the majority of that game. They really handled the Steelers. Mackenzie
Alexander played lights out, man. He was phenomenal over there.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about a running back that could end up coming back, right? Mm-hmm. Antonio Gibson.
Yeah.
Is he going to play this week? What's going on?
I'm very skeptical. I think the best return frame time for Antonio Gibson would be week 17. I get it. I mean, Antonio Gibson is a stud. So if he was somehow active this week, and again, I'm very skeptical about that happening with the turf toe. I usually the stuff that research shows and what we've seen for most players, even this year in the NFL, it's usually a 3-week absence. So week 17, I think, would be the ideal return time for him. But even if he is active, man, I would be. In my fantasy football championship, I would be very hesitant playing him. I think it would be a modified workload. I don't think the things that make Antonio Gibson great, burst into the outside, those big, elusiveness he has in the hole, things like that.
And his ability to fight for 2 or 3 yards too. He has this natural ability to get an extra 2 to 3 yards and fight for yards, which not all players have that motor. So this is something I swear if Antonio Gibson, can't put that pressure and that weight on there. Once again, we talked about, Joe Mixon being held out. I think that Antonio Gibson might not see the field the rest of the season. He's a young player.
Yeah. I know Washington has a little bit more to play for Cincinnati. So like I said, I don't think it's likely, but it wouldn't surprise me if Gibson was active and dressed for week 16, but he's not somebody I'd be really confident playing, even though he is Antonio Gibson. He's been amazing for fantasy football. We cannot deny, it'd be really hard benching Antonio Gibson if he was active, but just what I know about turf toe and, the prognosis around that, it'd be tough for me to play him. It really would.
Well, what about Christian McCaffrey? Is he coming back this week?
He's got as good a chance as ever, man. I don't, he's had terrible luck.
When you sit there and you rack up 400 freaking touches a year, that's going to happen.
I know.
Guys getting used.
And I was talking about that high ankle sprain data. He totally skewed it because I like to see what they do before and after games. And his sample is so small, before games, but he was averaging 25 points a game. And then after, he was averaging 30 points a game, even though he only played 1 game. So it totally skews all that data. I don't even know if I want to.
Wasn't that up against the Chiefs, I believe?
Maybe.
Plus, he's a freak. He's a physical freak. He's a monster. So he's an outlier.
I don't have a lot of intel on this. I just have a feeling in my gut from what I've read and from what I've seen. I think he really wants to play. I think he really wants to play the season. He wants to try to get out there for one more game. So if you're in the championship and you have Christian McCaffrey on your team and you made it this far, hold out hope. I think there's a possibility he plays this week.
That's awesome. Yeah, with data, I normally take the highest one that's out there. I throw that out, and I take the lowest one, and I throw that one out. So then you just have, pretty much the median, so you don't have those outliers. So
Yep.
I wouldn't hesitate to throw out Christian McCaffrey's data from 1 week. But anyways,
No doubt.
getting back to it, we're sitting there and we're looking at somebody that was supposed to play this past week. He's been playing, but last minute scratch, Zeke over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with Zeke? Like, is it the Tony Pollard show now? Like, what are we going to expect from Zeke?
So he's got this soft tissue injury, and I know we hear about it in week 15. I'm speculating here. I think this might have been something he's been dealing with for a while. It might explain why his play has been so poor.
That's what they're saying.
Honestly.
Like, he's actually had it for like 6 or 7 weeks or something like that.
It would make so much sense because Tony Pollard looked amazing. Like, Tony Pollard had juice on Sunday, and something that we didn't really see from Zeke in that offense. And I'm wondering if the Cowboys are thinking the same thing. We talked about a lot of teams at this point of the season eliminated from playoff contention. Cowboys are in that boat. I'm wondering if they're looking at Zeke and being like, you know what, Zeke, we appreciate you, doing what you can and playing through this, but you're clearly not 100%. Pollard has got the juice.
I knew that was coming. Was coming from Steph.
Yeah. So let's just ride him out. I mean, it would make the most sense to me. I'm not a Cowboys executive, but with these soft tissue injuries, they can take multiple weeks, especially with the calf for the running back. You talked about Antonio Gibson, kind of powering through. Zeke's been that guy. Zeke's the guy that moves the pile, right? He doesn't go down on first contact. So assuming it's a minor strain for him, research looking at high-level athletes says these injuries can take about 14 days. So even if it was a new injury that popped up in week 15, I think it's possible and, fairly likely that he doesn't play next week. But we'll have to see what the practice reports say.
All right, let's
tomorrow will be big for him.
Okay. God, a Wednesday being big. It's
Yeah.
crazy. All right, so let's go ahead and bring up one more running back. Rookie over there, LaMichael Pirine.
Yeah.
What's up with him?
He was designated to come back from IR last week. He didn't. I thought week 16 was a more realistic timeline. I think he could possibly come back and kind of muddy that Jets backfield. So I was just putting that in there. I know some people were finally excited about, what Ty Johnson was able to do. He had a big week. He kind of supplanted Frank Gore in some ways in that Jets backfield, and people are excited. So people doing waiver wire claims, I just keep that in the back of your mind. There might be LaMichael Pirine coming in there, making that a 3-man committee, something to think about.
Okay. Now, we just talked about, him being a rookie and, how they kind of want to protect these guys, right? Like they're probably going to see Antonio Gibson being protected a little bit, although, like you said, they do have a little bit more to play for. Like P-Rod being protected a little bit. Jalen Reagor, like, could he be protected? I know you brought it up briefly, but like, man, high ankle sprains. I know wide receivers aren't as bad, but it's still something that you don't really want to mess with.
Yeah, I really want to read the reports. The reports have been very vague at this point. I'd like to see what he kind of comes out on the official injury report next week, tomorrow, when we see the Eagles practice report, injury report. Does he practice at all? Like I said, I'm speculating here based on the video and kind of what I've been seeing on Twitter that makes sense. So I think it's very possible he has a high ankle sprain, but if he does, he's definitely not going to play this week. It's more of that low ankle sprain, more common kind of rolling your ankle and ankle sprain. I think he's probably got a 50-50 shot.
Well, let's talk about somebody else that, has a leg issue, and this guy screaming into the camera, man, don't sit me, right? Did you see that?
I did, yeah.
Oh, Keenan Allen, man, you should have sat him. He just lost people some championships, baby. He affected my guillotine league, my favorite league out there. So,
He hurt me too, man. I felt it. I think a lot of people felt it. It's tough too, because with Keenan Allen, man, it's like the last time he was limited, the dude exploded. He was amazing. He had a great fantasy football game. So it's like, I can't bench this guy. And if you've had Keenan Allen all year, he's been great for you. He's been amazing. Hamstring injury, I think we saw he was definitely limited, and it makes sense. So to start this week, Allen's actually not practicing. The Tuesday practice report came out for the Chargers, and he was listed as did not practice. I expect that to kind of be what it is. I'd like to see him get at least a limited practice on Friday to feel confident about playing him. If you somehow survived in week 15 playing him and you're in your championship, you might have him in week 16. I know he burned you, but again, if he gets some type of practice in Friday, I feel a little bit better about playing him.
Somebody else that's supposed to come back, John Brown, right? He was designated to return from the IR. So what happened with him? Why didn't he play?
It was one of those things where it was a rare. So we talked about like a classic inversion ankle sprain, kind of what people think about when they roll their ankle in for a sprain. John Brown had a little bit of a rarer injury. It was an eversion ankle sprain. It's where your ankle kind of goes outward.
I just usually did that in my seat and it kind of hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't
like
feel
I'm sitting
good,
down.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. Like I'm doing it right now. It's not good.
Your ankle's not supposed to bend that way. And that's why usually that injury is associated with fractures. And John Brown actually avoided a fracture, which was huge. But I thought when that happened, that was going to be at least a 3-week injury. If it was a fracture, it probably was going to end this season. The Bills are humming. I think John Brown has as good a chance as anybody to play this week. You might see him back on the field.
That's very interesting for me because, like, is he going to affect Gabriel Davis's production? Stephon Diggs might take a hit. Like, it's something as to where that's definitely worth monitoring if you have any one of those guys. But yeah, keep an eye on that. When it comes to another wide receiver that has had pretty much a pretty large impact, for this 2020 season, talk about Devontae Parker.
Yeah.
He's sitting there and he got ruled out. Lynn Bowden just smashed faces 2 weeks ago. This past week, not so much, but he's still worth a play. But if Devontae Parker comes back, you could see some targets, kind of dissipate. So what's going on with Parker? Are we going to see him play in week 16?
So Parker has a hamstring injury. I couldn't confirm if it was the same hamstring injury that he suffered earlier in the season. I would think it would be likely just based on the re-injury rates of hamstring injuries is somewhere around 40%. So I think it's very possible that he sustained another injury to that same hamstring. My thing with Devontae Parker is I watched him when he had that hamstring injury earlier in the season, and it affected him a lot. The way Devontae Parker wins, he likes to get off the ball quick. He likes to stretch the field vertically. He likes to get physical with that DB, and he was hampered by that hamstring injury. It was clear to me that he was operating, at 70% or below when he had that hamstring injury. So I think that was why he didn't play in week 15. I think he could play in week 16. I think it remains probably a bit of a long shot. And then he's another one. Talked about Antonio Gibson, my confidence level playing him, just based on what I saw with Parker earlier in the season with the hamstring injury and how it affected him. I would not be confident playing him.
Okay, so maybe he could be more of a decoy. So Lynn Bowden could have another, amazing week like he did 2 weeks ago. Man, Lynn Bowden looks so freaking good. He looks so good out there. He looks like a natural pass catcher. He looks like an athlete. Yeah. And I wasn't aware of why he got traded from the Raiders. I don't know if you were.
I definitely have heard rumors. I think part of it, what played into that is the Raiders drafted him to be a running back, right? And they wanted him to kind of be Josh Jacobs' backup. And I think they were probably disappointed in his production there, but I think he was probably miscast as a running back, right?
Yeah, he was. And he had trouble with pass blocking because he's not a big guy. Like he's not a pass blocker. So of course he's going to struggle with that. Like, if you really want him to be that, which he's not even that, like you got to work with him.
So the Raiders front office, I think at this point, again, I'm not a GM or an expert at scouting players, but I think they've done some pretty questionable stuff up to this point where it wouldn't surprise me is they're like, oh, this guy's in a running back. Let's just cut bait and move on. Miami's probably scouting Lynn Bowden up to the draft process because by the time they traded for him, it wasn't very far after the draft, and they probably scouted him as a wide receiver. We're really excited and heard that he was being made available, and we're like, let's get this guy and bring him in our wide receiver room. We really liked him, and they slotted him in the proper position at wide receiver.
So I was talking to Shane about this, right, from Dynasty Trades HQ. He came and stayed at my house over the weekend, and we were actually just sitting there talking about it. I guess he had trouble with clubbing, and that was behind the scenes while in Vegas. So he was going out and partying too much. So they didn't like that, and that's why they just got rid of him and lost, 2 rounds of draft capital, I believe.
And there was that weird story. I don't know if you remember hearing about that. There was that weird story where he got arrested, and it was because they thought he was affiliated with drugs or trafficking drugs, but like turned out to be his grandma or something. That happened.
What? I didn't hear that.
There was some weird story about he got arrested, but it was just questioned. He wasn't kept. And they found out that he was innocent of it. But there was like that weird association where like somebody in his family, I want to say it was his grandma. If it wasn't, I apologize to Lynn Bowden's grandma if that was not true. But I feel like that's what I heard. It was like some family member or something like that.
That's crazy. I didn't hear that story. I got to look that up. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into another Miami player, right? Because we had 2 big time pass catchers be out, which is, kind of what let Lynn Bowden, I guess, break out to an extent 2 weeks ago. We got Gesicki, man. What's going on with Gesicki?
So this is why I really like this injury tracker that I'm doing, because people out there can just get kind of like a first glance of what I'm thinking when I watch video. You sent me that Mike Gesicki video when it happened because I was traveling, and I looked at it, and originally I thought, man, that more looks like a Steiner. And then I looked at it after you and I had talked, and I was like, oh, it's actually his right shoulder. I was holding on his left shoulder. So let's kind of figure out. I slowed that video down. I tried to look at stuff. I'm like, man, that mechanism of injury, I could see where people would think that would potentially be a labral injury, but it really did not look like a labral injury to me, a labrum, torn labrum for his shoulder. So I wrote originally, I said, you know what? I think this guy, this is more of an example of being hurt than injured. I know he was in a lot of pain on the sideline. They were cradling his arm. But if those MRI come back clean, I think he doesn't have a labral injury and he could be playing, in a week or 2 here. And that's what we're seeing. It sounded like he was close to playing in week 15, which would have been shocking given how much pain he was. But because of that, I think week 16 could be a real possibility. So we talk about Lynn Bowden, we talk about Mike Gesicki. That'd be another reason where if Devontae Parker is playing out there, he's using more of that decoy role because there should be some decent targets for Tua.
Yeah, it's like, man, will Tua ever actually be able to, kind of sling the ball around a little bit? And it's going to be nice once they get this offensive line settled in, once Tua gets, you're in the system. So I'm excited for these Miami Dolphins. I really am. It's going to be interesting. Now, looking at last night, there's a player that got decked. There's actually, I think, 2 players that got decked that I missed out on. I think I missed out on one earlier. 2 players got decked. We'll go ahead and stick with the tight end since we're already talking about it. But, I mean, Eric Ebron, man. Like, there was like 3 guys that Big Ben threw it into. Like, I was like, what is he doing? There's 3 defenders in that area. I paused it. I looked at it. Like, I rewinded a little bit. I was like, what is he thinking? And then, of course, the announcers talked about it, and it was like, dude, it just made no sense. But he got hit. What was it? Like, it looked like his hip or something. I have no idea, like, what it was.
So they were reported as his back. He took a pretty decent shot, like you talked about. The Steelers originally sounds like we're worried about some like internal bleeding or like organ damage. All those images and tests came back negative. So for that reason, I think Ebron has a decent chance of coming right back in week 16. Even though he left the game so early, I think that was more a precautionary thing. When a player has that type of mechanism injury, and he's in that much pain, kind of flank pain is usually what it's referred to. And if he had some tender points, they're going to pull him out for safety, because if you have any internal bleeding or organ damage, that becomes a life-threatening issue, which is more important than football. So once he cleared those, as long as he can tolerate the pain, because he's going to be feeling it. I mean, he's going to have a decent bruise. If he can tolerate the pain, he can play week 16.
Well, I was sitting there, I was trying to read his lips, and it looks like he was saying my kidney. Like, that's almost like you could tell somebody say my kidney. Like, it's very blatant. So that's what it looked like he was saying. Obviously, he doesn't know. He just got hit. He just got leveled. So he doesn't know, but I'm sure it's something, internal-wise. But let's go ahead and hop over to the last player we want to talk about, and that's Tyler Boyd, because AJ Green, he's been looking okay. 2 out of the past 4 weeks, I believe.
Yeah.
Like AJ Green could be the only option outside of Higgins, the rookie, that could actually get some production. But Tyler Boyd went in with a concussion?
Yeah, and this one's going to be tough because sometimes these players are able to clear the concussion protocol pretty quickly and get back in a week. The thing working against Boyd is he had a Monday night game, right? So that's going to delay the steps that he's got to go through to clear the concussion protocol and be able to be ready for next week's game in week 16. So I think because of that, concussions vary per player. It's not a severity thing. It's based on your symptoms. It's based on if you're able to clear that protocol. But he has a shortened week. He's not playing in the same amount of time frame as some of these other guys. So I think because of that, Boyd might not play week 16, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that's something you need to keep your eye on. And even if he does play, it's not like he's locked into a starting role. So keep your eye on that, everybody. It's something where AJ Green could actually be a waiver wire pickup. But we do have a question coming in from FF Chef. What are the protocols for concussion? Like, what are these steps? Do you know off the top of your head?
No, there's a series of steps. There's a series of tests. You gotta not have certain symptoms, and some of them are the basic symptoms.
It's like headaches,
sensitivity to light, memory, nausea, things like that. So there's a checklist, and then there's kind of like a mental examination. I don't know the specifics of it, but basically a test, testing, your ability to have short-term memory, your reaction times, things like that, that are standard across the NFL. It's the same. It's not just team to team. Like every team has a different concussion protocol. No, it's a standardized protocol for each NFL team, but it's a lot of those things, a lot of monitoring by a medical doctor.
Yeah. And I believe don't they have a third party that comes in to do it as well towards the tail end of it? Like for the third step or whatever it is, like they have to make sure a third party's doing it, not just a team doctor. So they can't, just sneak somebody in there.
Yeah, similar to like how they have a third party step in to remove a player in game if they suspect a concussion. It's the team's not just allowed to put him in there. If the third party thinks he has a concussion, they have the authority to pull that player out and make sure they go through testing before they're able to go back in the game.
Dude, love it, man. And of course, Chef said, you guys rock. Thanks, Adam. Yeah,
no problem.
I want to thank you for coming on and helping us out. Steffi, like we said, was a little bit under the weather. She was still active, of course, in the group chat, but I guess her voice was messed up. She was taking care of herself, except for the ice cream part.
Yeah. Get well soon, Steffi. I hope you are feeling better next week.
Dude, absolutely, 100%. I'm sure she'll be back and firing off these crazy takes, like how the ankle's connected to the shoulder bone, which I absolutely love. So, anyways, let everybody know where to find you real quick, Adam, if you don't mind.
For sure. You guys can find me on Twitter at @therealadam_H. I'll be tweeting about injuries. And you can, as always, follow my injury tracker at theundroppables.com. The link to that is in my bio on Twitter.
And of course, you guys can go check out my stuff, ff_intervention. And you guys can find all of our content over there. Join our circle _. Make sure you guys go check out our YouTube channel so you don't miss any more episodes. It's youtube.com/fantasyintervention. Make sure you hit subscribe. And yeah, we have a show tomorrow night with Mike Cooterdoodle, and Chris Allen is actually coming on with us, which I am ecstatic about. Cannot wait to talk to Chris Allen. The dude is just through the roof intelligent. So he's going to be gone. We're going to be answering live questions. Like, I am stoked right now. I cannot wait. Man. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate you.
Yeah, man. Anytime you need me.
Thank you guys for listening, and thank you all for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. See you later.